The movie I'm going to explain today is called Shinjuku Incident. The story begins with a group of illegal immigrants who have fled from China and arrived in Japan. As they try to enter the country, a Japanese policeman spots them. One of the immigrants, panicking at the sight of the officer, swiftly pulls out a knife and kills him on the spot. This act triggers a stampede as the group desperately rushes to enter Japan illegally. Amidst the chaos, we meet a man named Nick. Having arrived in Japan with nothing, Nick steals clothes and shoes from a nearby house. Having entered Japan illegally by water, he begins searching for his friend Jay, a fellow Chinese immigrant who had come to Japan before him. As Nick wanders through the city, his main concern is avoiding the police, fearing they might catch him at any moment. The story then flashes back to Nick's life in China. He used to drive a tractor and was quite content with his life. However, his girlfriend, Yuko, had dreams of going to Japan to earn a lot of money. She promised Nick that once she had made enough, she would return to him in China. Nick was happy for her, but many years have passed, and Yuko has not yet returned from Japan. Nick learns that Yuko used to live with her aunt in Japan, but now that her aunt has passed away, Yuko is all alone in a foreign country. This realization terrifies Nick, prompting him to make the decision to go to Japan and bring Yuko back. The story then returns to the present, where Nick finally finds Jay's house. Jay lives in a crowded, rented room with 15 to 20 other people, all of whom are also illegal immigrants from China. Nick, scared and starving after days without food, immediately devours whatever he can find. Later, Jay takes Nick to a public bathhouse, but as they enter, they encounter members of the Yakuza gang. The gang leader sneers at them, saying, "Why do all you Chinese people come here to die?" Both Jay and Nick are terrified by the encounter. Nick confides in Jay that he came to Japan to find Yuko. Jay advises him that before he can search for her, he needs to find work. The next day, they meet a man who, after taking some money from them, helps them get a job picking up garbage. The following morning, as Jay and Nick are working in a garbage facility, Nick notices that a pile of garbage is about to fall on a man named Tai. At that moment, the police arrive. But in time, Nick and Jay manage to rescue the man named Tai from the falling garbage, saving his life. Grateful and desperate to save himself, Tai gave them some cards, which could be used for shopping. Jay explains to Nick that these cards are stolen, and with the help of these phone cards, they can make small purchases. After this, we are shown the funeral of Japan's biggest Yakuza chief, where all the members of the Yakuza have gathered. Following the death of the chief, a man named Mariguchi is shown to be the new leader, with his junior, Iguchi, beneath him. However, a man named Tokugawa receives the fewest votes, and angered by this, he storms out of the funeral. Next, we meet Inspector Cayetano, who has been tasked with apprehending illegal Chinese immigrants. We then see Nick and the rest of the immigrants working in the sewers of a tunnel. Suddenly, the police arrive and surround them, forcing them to line up. A translator is called, but his Chinese is so poor that Inspector Cayetano has to step forward and speak in his broken Chinese. Meanwhile, a policeman begins handcuffing an immigrant, causing panic among the group. The immigrants start running, and the police chase after them. During the chaos, Inspector Cayetano falls into a drain. Not knowing how to swim, he begins to drown. Seeing this, Nick jumps into the drain to save him. Once he ensures the inspector is safe, Nick quickly escapes. Moved by Nick's actions, Inspector Cayetano realizes that the Chinese immigrants are human beings just like them, and he vows to repay the favor someday. The next day, both Jay and Nick go to the market, where Nick observes that the immigrants are openly stealing. Jay explains to Nick that the Japanese are very honest people, which is why they leave their shops unattended. Shoppers can take what they need and leave the money behind. After stealing goods, they take them to the black market to sell and make a significant profit. However, Nick is an honest man and is uncomfortable with this work. He refuses to take any share of the money and instead quietly starts working as a dishwasher in a restaurant. Seeing his situation, a girl gives him some money and leaves. She is accompanied by an old man who is very drunk. Suddenly, some goons appear and try to harass the girl, injuring the old man in the process. When Nick sees this, he puts his utensils aside, grabs an iron rod, and confronts the goons, scaring them off. The girl then takes the injured old man back to the bar and gets him bandaged. It turns out that the bar belongs to the girl, whose name is Lily. She offers Nick some more money, but he refuses and instead returns the money she had given him earlier. It's clear that Nick is a man of principle. A few days later, we see Nick working in the restaurant with Jay. One day, a man named Iguchi enters the bar with his wife. To Nick's shock, he realizes that Iguchi's wife is none other than Yuko. Yuko and Nick exchange a glance, and Iguchi notices this. Later, when they get home, Iguchi asks Yuko, "Who was that man who was staring at you like that? And why were you looking at him the same way?" Yuko tells him, "That man is from my village." On the other hand, Nick's heart is shattered after seeing Yuko with Iguchi. Nick realizes that honesty holds little value in this world, and without power, survival is nearly impossible. This understanding leads him to abandon his principles and dive into illegal activities. From stealing goods to tampering with gambling machines for profit, Nick and his men immerse themselves in the underworld. However, unlike the others, Jay refuses to participate in these illegal activities because he is too fearful of the consequences. Respecting his friend's wishes, Nick and the others keep Jay out of their illicit dealings. When Nick asks Jay what he wants out of life, Jay tells him that he dreams of living a simple life, running a small nut cart. Understanding Jay's desire for an honest livelihood, Nick and his friends buy a nut cart for him. Jay is overjoyed, as this simple cart symbolizes his commitment to an honest living. On New Year's Day, Jay brings Lily along, as she has become a close friend to him. Meanwhile, Nick is making a lot of money from his illegal ventures. On the other hand, Jay is happily feeding nuts to the daughter of a local gangster. But when the girl's father sees this, he calls Jay to his house and beats him up severely. When Nick learns about this, he takes 2 or 3 men with him to confront the gangster. The gangster, however, has a lot of men on his side. But just as the fight is about to turn against them, more of Nick's companions arrive, armed with whatever they could find. A fierce brawl ensues, and Nick and his men manage to overpower the gangsters. In the midst of the fight, the police arrive. Realizing the danger, Nick quickly tries to retrieve Jay's nut cart, but Inspector Cayetano arrives on the scene. Instead of arresting him, however, Inspector Cayetano thanks Nick for saving his life in the sewer that day. Not only that, but the inspector also diverts the attention of the other officers, allowing Nick to escape with the nut cart. One day, Jay parks his nut cart in front of a gaming parlor. Tai, needing to use the restroom, asks Jay to watch his gaming seat for a moment. While Jay is sitting there, a man named Gao accuses him of tampering with the machine. Jay tries to explain that he is only there for the first time and usually sells nuts outside. But Gao doesn't listen and drags Jay out of the parlor. As Jay is being dragged out, Tai returns and sees what is happening. He immediately runs to find Nick and tells him everything. Nick and his friends rush to the parlor to save Jay. But before they can reach him, Gao brutally cuts Jay's face and, unsatisfied, goes further by cutting off one of Jay's hands. Without his hand, Jay would never be able to play games again. Jay, who had always been the good one among them, suffers this horrible fate. When Nick and the others arrive, Nick demands Jay's severed hand back. But Gao, proving to be utterly ruthless, crushes the hand instead. Nick and his companions quickly flee with Jay, taking him back to their hideout. Since they are living illegally in Japan, taking Jay to a hospital would mean involving the police. Instead, they call a doctor to their home, desperate to save their friend. Nick becomes overwhelmed with emotion as he watches Jay scream in agony during his treatment. Fueled by anger and grief, he decides to take revenge. He goes to the club alone, carrying a sword. At this moment, Gao and Iguchi are about to have a meeting. It becomes clear that Gao has planned to kill Iguchi during this meeting. As Nick watches from the shadows, Gao pulls out a knife and attacks Iguchi. Just as Gao is about to strike Iguchi a second time, Nick emerges and cuts off Gao's hand, just as Gao had done to Jay. After this, both Iguchi and Nick flee the scene. Iguchi takes Nick to his home, where Nick meets Yuko and her daughter. Iguchi offers Nick a job, but Nick initially refuses. However, the next day, Iguchi visits Nick again, bringing another job offer. This time, Nick agrees, but he has one condition. He wants legal status in Japan. In return, Nick will work for Iguchi. Iguchi, eager to eliminate his enemies, gives Nick a large sum of money, and Nick begins his work. As a result, riots break out between the gangs across the city. The violence escalates, and Iguchi eventually becomes the sole boss by eliminating all his rivals. True to his word, Iguchi grants Nick control over Shinjuku. With his new power, Nick immediately shuts down all the illegal businesses in Shinjuku. He tells his companions that he wants to start fresh and avoid any illegal activities. Instead, he proposes that they open a restaurant so that even the police won't trouble them. Everyone is pleased with his decision, except for Jay. Jay, deeply affected by the loss of his hand and the scars on his face, has become a different person. The traumatic incident has left him bitter and angry. Noticing this, Nick gives Jay some territory to manage, hoping it will help him find purpose. As the years pass, Jay becomes more deeply involved in illegal activities with Iguchi. He forms his own gang and engages in street fights and drug trafficking. However, Nick is unaware of Jay's descent into the criminal underworld because they haven't seen each other for a long time. One day, Inspector Cayetano visits Nick and informs him that Jay is heavily involved in Iguchi's drug business. This news devastates Nick. He never wanted any of his friends to be involved in such dangerous activities. Nick promises the inspector that he will try to make Jay understand and turn him away from this path. Inspector Cayetano then presents Nick with another condition. If Nick can bring evidence against Iguchi, the police will not arrest him. Lily also urges Nick to agree to the inspector's proposal, but Nick is torn. He doesn't want to betray his friends, the very people who gave him food and shelter when he had nothing. In a moment of desperation, Nick begins to confess to the inspector that he has killed 2 people on Iguchi's orders. Hearing this, Lily becomes furious and slaps Nick, angry at the thought of him sacrificing himself for his misguided sense of loyalty. She tells Nick that by sacrificing yourself, you are saving your 2 friends who don't care about you at all. But now Nick is completely with Inspector Cayetano. That's why Nick brings Inspector Cayetano to his main base. He sees that there are other illegal immigrants with Jay who are doing the drug business. Then here Nick explains to all of them that you all should leave this business. We can do some simple business, and if you testify against Iguchi with me, then you people will also be saved. But in the meantime, that man named Tai cuts the neck of his partner, and seeing this, Nick also realizes that now the same thing is going to happen to him. But then a stone comes from outside the window and hits Tai's head, and within no time, stones start raining there. And we see that this work is done by Iguchi's right hand, Nakashima. Actually, here, Nakashima has a different motive. He wants to drive out all the Chinese people from Japan, and for this reason, he wanted to kill Nick and all his companions, which is why he attacked Nick's hideout with all his men. But Iguchi is also with them, and here Iguchi tries to run away from there, but his right hand, Nakashima, shoots him right there. Now, while dying, Iguchi took out a pen drive from his possession and told him to give this pen drive to the inspector because inside this pen drive there is complete information about all the illegal businesses of the Yakuza people. Now we see that the police reach there, and Nick runs there in an injured condition. He is searching for his friend Jay here, but he sees that Jay is no longer in that fight. Then he covers the body of his friend Jay here, and then he calls Yuko and tells her that now Iguchi is no more in this world. After that, Nick calls Yuko to a place. But here, Iguchi's enemy gang members have already reached Iguchi's house. And not only this, but here they sent some of their people to kill Nick. Due to this, Nick is running away from there to save his life. And before the inspector's arrival, those people had injured Nick very badly, and then Nakashima was about to kill Nick. But then Inspector Cayetano reaches there and shoots Nakashima there. Now here, the inspector reaches the same drain while searching for Nick, where Nick had saved his life earlier, but here Nick is lying in a half-dead condition. The inspector could not do anything for his condition. After which, in the end, Nick takes out that pen drive from his hand and gives it to the inspector, after which he died there and got mixed in the same sewer in the water, and with this, the story ends here. So how did you like this story? Do tell in the comment. Goodbye.